Good morning. Happy Friday to you all. Welcome to a special edition of our Friday morning seminar here at CURL, the Center for Urban Research and Learning at Loyola University Chicago. My name is David Van Zijtveld, and I'm the director here at CURL. We were honored some weeks back to be asked by Dr. Nancy Tuckman, the founding dean of the School of Environmental Sustainability here at Loyola. If she asked us if we would be willing and interested in using this Friday morning seminar time slot of ours to be a part of the much larger climate change conference here at Loyola. And not being fools, we said yes, we would be happy to be a part of that. So for some of our regular attendees, if the format seems different because we're in a webinar, you're not crazy, it is different, but we will have the same great kind of conversation that we have every other week. For those of you unfamiliar with CURL, we are a non-traditional research center that specializes in community-based participatory action research and education. We look to connect local, regional, and even national groups and communities to the rich resources here at Loyola. The goal for us in all of our work is to collaboratively seek solutions to issues of concern to our local communities and to our many partners. This Friday morning time slot is something we started when we began way back in 1996. It's a space we use to gather community and university partners together to talk about whatever issues are of interest to them. And so when Dr. Tuckman asked us if we'd be interested in using this space, we were quick to say yes, and fairly quick to turn around and see who we might have in our partnership portfolio, who among our friends might be good partners for this. And immediately we turned to two of them, the School of Social Work here at Loyola University, and of course, our featured guests from People for Community Recovery, doing the work of environmental justice on the south side of Chicago. All three organizations, CURL, Social Work, and PCR, are a natural fit to be a part of the much larger climate change conference. School of Social Work provides transformative education by taking it out of the classroom wherever possible to be sure to engage the students and faculty with local communities in the process of research and education. And of course, who better to have in a conversation about the long local fights for environmental justice, particularly here in Chicago, than our friends at People for Community Recovery, who have been working on this issue, on all these issues for more than 40 years. Before I begin by introducing very briefly our guests, because you really do want to hear from them and not me, here are some housekeeping details. It's going to be a conversation format. We have some videos at the front end, and you'll get a sense of who everyone is. And then Dr. Kring and Ms. Johnson will take questions and have a conversation. And you'll be able to use the Q&A at the bottom of your screen to give us questions. Given the number of people, I see we're at about 110 or so. We won't be able to get everyone's question, but we will do our best. It is being recorded, but rest assured that if you're not appearing on camera as one of the panelists, you don't appear in the recording, but just want to let you know. Finally, if you wish to use the live transcript, the closed captioning, click on the live transcript button at the bottom of your webinar, of your Zoom screen, webinar screen. All right, without further ado, let me just give you a taste of who it is that you're going to be hearing and listening in on a conversation. We have Ms. Cheryl Johnson, who is the Executive Director at the People for Community Recovery. She's a longtime resident of Altgeld Gardens, public developments located on the far side, south side of Chicago. She's the proud mother of two, a grandmother of one, and as I found out this morning, like many of us, a proud pet owner of 2 dogs and several fish. She is the proud daughter of the late Hazel Johnson, who is known by many people as the mother of environmental justice. She founded a partnership, the People for Community Recovery, over 40 years ago. You'll hear more about that work, and I will leave it to her to do a much better job of introducing herself and the work of her mother and all the folks in her organization. We're going to be moderated today by Dr. Amy Krings, Associate Professor in the School of Social Work here at Loyola. She has her PhD in Social Work and Political Science from the University of Michigan, and her research focuses on how marginalized groups can strategically and collectively advance social and environmental justice. So again, you can see why we turn to these two people these two organizations to join us here at Curl for the Friday morning seminar as a part of the Climate Change Conference. And so without further ado, I am going to turn my camera off and mute myself and turn it over to Amy.
Hello, good morning, good day. Thank you for that introduction, David. As you said, I am honored to be here and excited to be here, especially for the opportunity to be in conversation with Cheryl Johnson, whose work I admire, as well as the work of her mother and the members of People for Community Recovery. Our talk today is titled Environmental Justice Work on the South Side of Chicago, People for Community Recovery. So we're going to begin by talking about what is environmental justice work, as well as giving some context about the South Side of Chicago and the origin of People for Community Recovery. Before we dive into that, I also want to express my thanks and gratitude to the organizers of the Climate Change Conference. This, I believe, is the last event in that conference. I think it's exciting that after participants have spent the week thinking through these critical and complex issues, some of which feel overwhelming and hard to address, that we have someone to talk with and learn from who's been doing this good work, and whose organization has been doing this work for more than 40 years. Cheryl Johnson is also important to hear from because there are many people who've been doing environmental justice work for a long time for their own survival and the survival of their communities, and who are on the front lines of this work. I think it's important to center the voices of people who are most impacted. Why? One, because they've been doing this work for a long time, sometimes without recognition. Two, because they have skin in the game, meaning they sometimes have a different sense of urgency than people who don't experience some of these issues firsthand. Sometimes they can have a different set of priorities. And also they have good and important ideas about solutions. Their lived experiences have made them experts in the work for environmental justice. And that's why we're so fortunate to learn from Cheryl today. So we're going to begin now by watching two brief videos that are going to give us some context about Cheryl Johnson, about People for Community Recovery, and about environmental justice work on the South Side of Chicago.
Hazel Johnson was born on January 25, 1935, in New Orleans, Louisiana. She met her husband, John Johnson, in her late teens, and the newlyweds moved to Chicago in 1955. It's there she got involved with grassroots activism. She and John moved their family to Allgale Gardens in 1962, but their wonderful life took a turn in 1969 when John was diagnosed with lung cancer and died weeks later at the age of 41. Hazel later heard from neighbors about others experiencing cancer and lung issues like asthma, and of mothers in the neighborhood with high rates of miscarriages or delivering babies with birth defects. She discovered her community had the region's highest cancer rate and began investigating environmental conditions surrounding the neighborhood. Armed with the knowledge of the health issue related to the environment and determined to act, she shifted focus to address environmental hazards surrounding her community, which she coined the Toxic Donut. In 1982, People for Community Recovery officially incorporated as a not-for-profit organization and waged the environmental justice war on multiple fronts. In 1991, Hazel spoke powerfully about her community's struggle with environmental racism at the first National People of Color Leadership Summit in Washington, D.C. It's there she helped work to create the 17 Principles of Environmental Justice, a guidepost still used today. She emerged as a national leader and was christened the Mother of Environmental Justice Movement. In 1994, Hazel was invited to the White House to witness the signing of Executive Order 12898, federal action to address environmental justice in minority populations and low-income populations. Later, President Clinton honored PCR as one of the country's top 100 environmental groups. On January 12, 2011, Hazel died as a result of congestive heart failure. In 2015, the Illinois General Assembly designated 130th Street Hazel Johnson EJ Way to commemorate the legacy of the Mother of Environmental Justice. Hazel's work continues today through People for Community Recovery, and her legacy lives on in the community-led environmental justice struggles across the country. That is a road that you just go take and just sit on the rocks and just look at the river and just serenity, just peace, you know. Been living out here since I was 1 year old.
What? Jungle life. Oh, they claim it's statistics to blame it on ballistics. Then they make statistics say my ninja's ballistic.
Most of the people names that's up here on this wall is really related to health-related issues, dying from cancer or asthma. Got no Haywood Lockett, he had cancer. James Solomon Sturz, Pinky, Andre Walker, I know all them folks. Diane Struck. That is a road that you just go take and just sit on the rocks and just look at the river.
It's common, but what's more common? Environmental problems. Narratively flip it, so whip it like that. PCR, we invented this. Introduced grammar, got them on our tippy tip. Tip of the brick, the scale, how our movement hit. Deep impact on our Morgan Freeman-ish. Justice for environment, we grinded, no retirement. Hazel Johnson passed the torch, we keep that fire lit. And our crew lit, you can call us fire stick. Watch People for Community recover this.
One of their first environmental victory that my mother had.
It was over 500 of us protesting the landfill.
They blocked the entrance to this landfill.
Back in 87, I think it was.
Where they turned around 57 dump trucks within 2 to 3 hours.
Then the next thing that we did.
The city was in serious violations of the Clean Air Act.
We protest against CWM incinerator.
And the community came together to shut down this operation.
United we stand, divided we fall.
This was a winner. So I think power is developed collectively. Every body of water flows to another body of water.
Okay, so I think those videos can be important because they help us have a bit of a image in the history of this work, how important it is, as well as a little bit of history about the movement. So good morning, Cheryl Johnson. It's good to see you. I know you asked me to call you Cheryl, so that's what I will do. And I wonder if you could start us off at the beginning. Let's begin at the beginning. Can you tell us the origin story of People for Community Recovery, and also a bit about your community of Altgeb Gardens and what it was like growing up there as a child?
Okay, good morning, everybody, and thanks for giving me this opportunity to have a discussion about EJ and my community. First, I would start off that I've been living in this community for 60 years. Matter of fact, today, the 18th, is the day that my mother moved in 1962. Interesting, I just made that connection, y'all, just at this moment. So I just made 61 last Friday on the 11th. So that's how I know the exact day, because she always instilled that into me. So when I grew up in this community, It was the greatest time. And anyone that you talk to that's from Allgale Gardens during the period up to the 60s to the 90s, we always had good things to say about our community, despite what the air quality was smelling like every day, despite that we didn't know that the little rivers and stuff that runs through our community, 19 miles of it, is highly contaminated. Not even knowing that the soil that our community was built on was contaminated from the operation of George M. Pullman sewage treatment facility back in the 1860s. So from that historical standpoint, I grew up in a community that had a cohesiveness, and it was a self-contained community, and we really didn't have to go out our community for anything. All the skill sets that I have today is because of where I live. It's a good place to raise children. So living out here, and that's why I still live out here. I never lived anywhere else in my life. I always lived in this neighborhood. The openness, the open land that we have out here. So it was a good place, and it was a community, and it's still a community today. You know, I think I'm kind of spoiled to the fact that when I'm getting out my car with a bag, I'm not allowed to carry. One of my neighbors going to say, "No, let me get that, Cheryl." You know, it's very helpful. If I need someone to walk my 2 dogs, as someone said earlier, you know, I can call a neighbor and ask them, would they walk my dog? And now, since I had been in a car accident and my walking is limited, I really got a lot of help. And sometimes I'd be like, okay, let me be independent, you know. So this is my experience right now today in my community, and I love it. And I guess it's part of a safety net for me too, also. When I look at it, and I like being involved with my community, but it got a lot of problems, and it had a lot of problems since it was built, you know. But things has changed, and I just want to be involved with the change in my community. And the genesis of PCR started with my mom activism in the community. My mother's been very active all my life, you know, assisting the teenagers in parties and trips, and just heavily engaged in the community, you know, being involved with getting other buildings built in our community, getting a school built in our community. I remember my mother was heavy involved with, so she always been active, and she always been a part of what we call a resident council. But she felt that resident council wasn't doing the things that it needed to address the deterioration of our community. In many ways, infrastructure, policies, and treating people unfair. So she decided that she would branch out from that group and form People for Community Recovery. So it was her and 6 other women in the community and 1 man that founded People for Community Recovery in the basement of one of the very first church that was ever built in Allgale.
So I think something I hear very clearly, and I've heard you talk about before, is how much love there was in Allgale Gardens for the community and investment in it. And I think that's really important for our audience to hear, because I think the popular image of public housing in Chicago is one of disinvestment and fear, maybe where people don't trust their neighbors. But something I hear you saying very clearly is people look out for one another and want to see the community as healthy as possible. And when I say healthy, I mean in all kinds of ways, like quality schools, recreation, looking out for elders, making sure there's programming for youth. So I think that's really important. And then another thing I hear you saying is how much investment, originally like federal investment there was in public housing that didn't keep up over time. And so I think that's an important part of this story too. Did I capture that right?
Yeah, and you know, and unfortunately that my community had always was given a bad rap, even though this was one of the most sustainable community historical community in the city of Chicago. You know, if it wasn't for my upbringing in this community, far as sports related, I love to swim. I can't wait to get back into a swimming pool because I learned right in my community, but many other sports. And there was also other employment opportunities in our community. It was a tradition when the guys make 18 after they graduate out of high school to go work in the local industries in our community. And in the steel mill at that particular time, that was, and for a motor copy, that was just standard practice. So we was a highly employed neighborhood. And it was only built upon the head of the household income. The dynamics started changing, the income dynamics started changing when it became that everyone 18 and over had to contribute to the rent in the community. And some people felt like, hey, I could go back home at the amount of what they asked me for rent. And that's what traditionally happened. And that's how the Golden Gates community actually got built, that is very adjacent to Allgale. So, and we had another cooperative, housing cooperative, that if the income exceeded what CHA were allowed, there was another community that was built just to accommodate that population. So most of the people in this area migrated to adjacent neighborhoods to this area. So we built this community, and it was very successful at that particular time. The only thing we lacked was the real infrastructure, like public transit in our area, because we only have one bus in and one bus out. But it's the exploitation that began the deterioration of public housing. So you have to make this community look bad in order for you to exploit what had happened. So much mismanagement of funding and services is still happening. It's a general practice today in public housing. So if you seen when they tore down all these units around the city of Chicago for the transformation, they was more concerned about brick and mortar, but not the human development. So they put people out there and did prepare people for those different opportunities that supposedly been happening, but really have not happened for many folks. So we had to fight because they was going to tear down Allgale Gardens in 2000. That was proposed. And we organized, People for Community Court, organized the community, the former resident and the current resident. And we stood strong, 200 or 300 people every time at a meeting, saying, no, you're not going to destroy our history, because we appreciate our history. Every annual picnic, we have two to 3,000 former residents come back and enjoy each other, you know, and support each other. But it's just that the disinvestment that happened in this area caused a deterioration of being a sustainable community that changed it. And getting people today to see that difference, you know, the lack of services in our community, and to fight that, we always say, you know, when you live in the city of Chicago, people low income stratas get beat down. But when you live in public housing, you get beat down twice, you know, and that's only the perception. Like, we don't care. We're the most caring and receptive people in any of these neighborhoods. And I'm saying it because I'm prejudiced. I'm prejudiced because I love my neighborhood, and that's where I'm still here. You know, when you come to my neighborhood, you wouldn't want to leave. So it's quite the opposite, and they have to, and it's unfortunate that people be shell shocked when they come and see something different. You know, but when we talk about EJ, when we talk about environmental justice, it's about the truth or the lie. Either if we're going to understand the true reality that happens to low income and poor communities around the country, and particularly in the city of Chicago, and the environmental racism that occur in this city among Black and brown communities, you know, is true. So how are we going to deal with that today? You know, so are we going to continue to perpetrate the lie, or are we going to get to the truth so we can get to a level of understanding you know, because we got to change this way, because the pollution that happens in my neighborhood, it just don't stay here. It affects everybody. And who are we going to make the choice? We want to breathe clean air, or we going to continue to breathe dirty air?
Yeah.
You know, and we have to do that collectively as a group.
I love, you made a lot of really important points. I think one of the things that I hear you saying really clearly is that the disinvestment in Alt-Geb Gardens and other neighborhoods that experience toxics and environmental injustices, it's not by accident. There are policy decisions that were made that contributed to these dynamics, and they're not natural. It could have been other decisions made. So for instance, how isolated the community is in terms of public transit. And that's by design, right? Like it doesn't have to be that way. The reduction in investment. And you also talked about environmental racism in terms of both who's impacted in terms of hosting toxics, but also whose word is believed. And I think that narrative that people don't care is such a dangerous narrative. It misdiagnoses the problem. If you believe that the root cause of environmental injustice and environmental racism is that people just don't care, then your intervention becomes trying to teach people to care, which can be very insulting. But if you diagnose the problem as rooted in unjust policies, or not believing a lie, or not understanding the root causes, then your focus shifts towards changing these social and political structures that marginalize the people who are impacted most. I think if it is okay with you, I know we have a few slides that help depict what you're talking about. For example, when you say that Alt-Geb Gardens is like a toxic donut, you can visualize that. So do you want to go to the slides?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay.
Okay, this is Alt-Geb Gardens. And this is prior to the renovation that has occurred in the past 15 years. And if you see this map right here, we're the community area 54. So we're at the borderline of the city of Chicago with adjacent villages, Dalton and Riverdale. Next slide. This is where our very first office was located. It's known as, we call it, it's our commercial strip, but we're calling it up top. So this is one of the historical buildings that we are currently fighting for right now to get it renovated. We're no longer in there. We're Chicago Housing Authority allowed us to have to convert an apartment into our office until there's space for office space for our organization in the community. Next slide. This is what my mother called the toxic donut. As you can see in the center of this donut is Alt-Geb Gardens. And if you look at the legend would tell you in red how many hazardous waste sites is located around our community. The blue you would see would tell you the toxic release, the Superfund sites, and the brownfield site. So this is a visual that you can really see that, and the biggest, and the sewage treatment facility is twice as big as Alt-Geb. So the emissions alone that's coming right directly across the street from the sewage treatment facility, it's a constant fight that we're engaged in as far as air quality issues. The next slide. Now you can look at this in the different parameters. As you can see, Alt-Geb sits in the center, and outside the parameters, all these different facilities and exposures based on miles and stuff where they at. If you see at the top on your left-hand corner, that's a steel processing center that's still located. Below that, that is the word recommendation district digesters that we had to advocate that they use as a means to reduce the number of slug beds that they operated on a facility. right here is, this is what we experience every summer. Spring and summer is the illegal dumping in our area because we got a lot of open space. And this is the Little Calumet River. This is what to be expected also with contamination in the Little Calumet River. As you can see at the top on your right-hand side, that's the International Port Authority that is less than a mile away from Allgale. And every day, there's a leak or a spill or an accident on the Bishop Ford Expressway. Below that is one of the landfill operators in our area. That's one dimension of, you can look at the Land Lakes landfill. But if you look on the other side, this is the Land Lakes landfill that sits right on the Little Calumet River, as you can see. And at the bottom, where this arrow is pointing to, is actually when the Chicago Housing Authority manager for our development allow for these transformers liquid to be buried in our community. And the soil been contaminated for like over 30 years before they actually had a successful cleanup. And we was heavily involved with the cleanup this is PCB. I can tell you this, they only wanted to go 6 feet into the soil as far as cleanup. But we advocated and forced them to go 20 feet where it did hit the water table. So they had to fill it in, and then before they fill it in with gravel before filling the rest in with soil to bring that soil up to make it safe again, right in the heart of our community. Next slide. So those are the few, just to give you a visual of what my community looked like or had experienced these many environmental harms that have been in this area. The only thing that I have to say is that Allgale was built in 1944, 1940 to 1944. And Chicago knew that this land was heavily contaminated because they went on and built Allgale Gardens because there was a need for housing for the returning World War II veterans that moved in Allgale Gardens. So it was only one of the 4 public houses that was built strictly for veterans. But they knew that the land was contaminated and they built it anyway.
Sure, I'm trying to imagine what it was like. You know, in the introduction, David mentioned that you're a mother and your work was inspired by your mother. And you said there were 6 women and 1 man who started the organization. I assume many of them were parents. I'm also a new mommy. And I think about what it must have been like for your mother with 7 children and to lose your father at just 41 years old. Yeah, she had every reason to turn inward and focus on her family. That must have been a true crisis in a lot of ways. And yet she turned outward and started working on these issues that for so many of us can feel overwhelming. And I wonder if you have memories of what that was like, especially from a mother's perspective, to do that sort of work, you know, with kids in tow, or did she see her work as part of being a mother? What role did the theme of being a woman and being a mother play within her activism and later your activism?
Well, I think being a mother, being a parent is the overall reason why mother gets involved with things, with health related issues that will probably have a negative impact on their family. So because we had a personal experience with early, when my sister-in-law was pregnant and she had to abort her twins because they was heavily deformed, for an example. When you hear people in your community, back then, you know, cancer was considered a negative curse in the community. So you didn't have a lot of discussion about that. But sometimes you sit on a porch and you start talking to folks And people get to tell you who's suffering with cancer, who's in remission, or who have died. And my mother just felt that that was just too many people in one common area, not to signify that something is going on. In conjunction, that is abnormal to have a lot of pollutants in the air that you could smell every day in this area. I think back then it was like in the tonnage per day. I think it's in the 100,000 at the present moment from the, and that's where we went from. So when you come down the Bishop Ford Expressway, once you get to 115, our community was just identified by the smell and was unbearable, so and my mother just felt like, that's, what harm is this doing to us? Until a report came out by the city of Chicago that stated that the Southside of Chicago have the higher incidence of cancer than any other area within the city of Chicago based on zip code. And our zip code was number 1. And she put it together with my father passing away 10 years prior to forming PCR, that his cancer was so rapid. It was diagnosed on March of '69, and he passed that following June. So making those connections and just caring about the welfare and the health of the community was so important, and why it inspired my mother to do the research. And from my own personal research, she found out we have 50 documented landfills, 250 leaking underground storage tanks, and all those facilities, hazardous waste facility site that you've seen on the map. And it's over, at that particular time, was over 350 of them in our community. And each one of them was polluting our air, our water, or contaminating our land. That have to have an impact, and that's why she got involved.
Yeah, I think that first off, I just want to say how sorry I am about the loss of your father at such a young age. And I think I think it's really important to grapple with the human impact of climate change and environmental justice. Sometimes it can feel like we intellectualize it maybe, or we talk about statistics or that sort of thing. And I think it's really important to remember we're talking about the quality of people's lives and the length of their lives. And you mentioned even the rate of miscarriages or children that were
Birth defects.
Yeah, birth defects. I mean, that's tough to bear, and then also to have the courage and the bandwidth to fight these issues. The other thing I think that is so important for people to hear is how much effort in terms of research People for Community Recovery has had to put forth. It sounds so, for instance, when I've worked in the past in an environmental justice community in Southwest Detroit, I remember a young man, probably about 13 years old, he got up and he talked about how he has asthma, his mother has asthma, his grandmother has asthma. And at first, how they understood that was it was just hereditary. It was just the whole family. That was something that they pass along. But with more information, they came to understand, no, it was from the air quality that had this impact on their health. And I think I try to imagine what it would be like as your mother, as People for Community Recovery, to begin learning not just the scope of toxics around you, but the impacts of those particular chemicals. So I've heard you before speak sounding like a chemist, explaining this compound comes from this factory and this one comes from this one and this goes in the water, in a way that it's clear you have a command for the human impacts on these chemicals in a way that a lot of people just don't have to deal with. And so, it seems like it's both this labor of love combined with being a citizen scientist, combined with being tenacious in holding these polluters accountable or trying to prevent them. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I have learned self-taught, through trials and tribulations, and learning how to learn about what have I exposed to in my community, particularly in my community. Like we had a lot of polyaromatic hydrocarbons in our community. And it's come from the industrial process of the sewage treatment farm back with Georgia Employment Operation. And to see that those chemicals don't die, they multiply because they have so many half-lives that of 500 years before it ever cleanse, removed from the environment. So if you add the count, in addition to other metals that's in the soil, for an example, you almost creating a toxic soup. And I was forced to learn what are those impacts, like metal lead. We know lead don't serve no purpose in our body, but we expose it for commercial and residential use that have an impact in our community. So what those negative impacts will have, learning disability, in my community, we always misdiagnose. For an example, if there's a conjunctivitis in my neighborhood, the pink eye, and if everybody in the community got pink eye, we think that it's something that we pass on. We really don't think about, is it an irritant in the sky, or is it a virus? But I understand I have to be in proximity of a person who's carrying that virus in order to be exposed to that virus. But I understand if it's an irritant, it can affect my whole community because it's in the air. But how many of us go to the doctors and ask to be tested to see was there any test the secretion in our eye to determine if it was an irritant or a virus? They just treat it. They just give you medicine and it's being treated. That's it.
Right.
And you seem to see that a whole lot in my community. It took for us to go from 100 milligram deciliters of blood for us to realize that a child should not have no more than 10 microliters per deciliter of blood of lead in their body that make it have a behavior problem. So we had to prove that each one of those stages from 100 to 80 to 50 to 20, then 10, now we're down to 5, but if it wasn't for a group of parents who are experiencing that with their kids because they have learning disabilities and all, or irritated in systems where, because, education is not there because they steady eating the wrong food, a lot of fatty food, which increased the absorption rate of lead in the body. So when you deprive people of that information and opportunity, this is what we're experiencing as far as the health crisis that we are in today.
Yeah. Kind of a follow-up question. We know that the contamination, it's not just local. It can spread, of course, but at the same time, some of the heaviest impacts are felt by people living in proximity. So a lot of environmental justice campaigns are localized. They're concentrated in one neighborhood, and that's the case all over the US and even all over the world. And so a question I have is if or how you've been able to build coalition with other groups doing organizing, like I think, for example, like Little Village, they have a strong organization with El Vejo.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious, if and how you've been able to branch out in other areas to build alliances and build your power, while balancing that with the unique impacts that are happening for you in your community.
I think my mother did it very well, is that she had a story to tell, and she was willing to tell that story to anybody. that wanted to listen and learn from her own personal experience. As a result of her going to different places and meeting different people, that reciprocated to other places and other places. And PCI had the opportunity to meet with people not only in Illinois, but in Indiana, in Michigan, in Louisiana, from her hometown, where she's from, to Texas, to New Jersey, with the whole lot of environment problems that they have there. And they came together, And I think what's interesting, what I love about my mother, she didn't look at it as a racial thing. She looked at it as a humanistic thing that we all need to be involved with. Because in my neighborhood where I grew up, and we're next door, a mile away, to the Hedwich community, which was an Irish community. And at that particular time, we knew we shouldn't cross over Torrance Avenue or even be in that area at night. My mother broke that line because she started working with that community, because we have a commonality about the pollution that was coming from the water treatment facility. And we started going over there. I remember just me and her in a meeting and a crowd of white folks, white people, just, I remember going to Bearstown, Indiana. It was just me and her, learning, exchanging, providing the information. And I think that's how that structure began, about working with other groups, collaborating with other groups, and from a local standpoint all the way up to a national standpoint. And I think that's why we have a good reference in those arenas, because not a lot of stuff my mother couldn't do locally, so she had to go nationally, because Chicago was so resisting to environmental justice in this community, or anything that pit community against industry in this area, because at that particular time, they was their biggest political supporters. So, and we're just, people in public housing or living an isolated area in the city of Chicago, and low income people, and we got deprived and ignored, talked about. I experienced that with my mom over many times. I wanted to fight, because out of the love and the protection you have for your mother, and to see people disrespecting her when she's just trying to provide information. But it didn't stop her. She didn't stop. She didn't stop to 2009 when she said, I quit. I'm not doing it anymore, and she passed away in 2011.
I mean, what I like hearing you say is she was a political strategist. If Chicago wouldn't budge, okay, then I'm going to take this to a state level, to a national level. I'm going to build alliances that you didn't see coming with groups that maybe historically have been in conflict or just divided, which again is a result of policy in terms of how segregated the city is. But she was able to overcome some of those divides in a strategic way with courage, it sounds like.
Right. And I always tell people too, even though she's known as the mother of environmental justice, but she always been Mama Hazel, Mama Johnson, or just Mama in the community, and humble. Growing up, I was kind of jealous about that. I was like, this is my mama, but as I moved on with her through this whole movement, and I got the chance to say, I love the fact that people call my mother Mama, or, Mama Johnson, Mama Hazel, it's because it's the love and respect that people have for, for her and the things that she done. So that's what's outstanding.
That is her humility.
Mm-hmm.
Did she know that she was the mother of the environmental justice movement? When they announced it, they even surprised us. She didn't even know that they was going to quarantine the mother of environmental justice, for one. And she said it was always something that's needed to be done because we are having an impact on Mother Earth, and she understood that. And she really didn't, she did it because she cared. She didn't look for the accolades that comes behind from the work that she did.
That was just the way she worked. She just looked at it as something that needed to be said and told and changed. So she didn't believe that she was having that much impact. She would be totally surprised. That's even like she worked with Barack Obama, introducing him to the community so he can work in the community. But she never knew that that man was going to be the president of the United States.
She was a political
to work with her under her guidance at that particular time. And he saw the needs and the unfairness and the broken policies. And that was one of the reasons why he said he was going to law school, that I remember he told her to come back and help community like ours. So I don't know if that happened or not, but my community is there.
Well, let me ask you a question from our audience that it relates to this question of alliances and coalitions. So Karen Lewis asked, what is your advice for being good allies for these communities? I think she probably means communities that experience environmental injustice. So rather than swooping in with the false assumption that an external group has the right answers. And I want to kind of add on to that question just by saying how important I think it is to be accountable to groups like yours that have been doing this work and have such a robust understanding. So can you say a little bit, bearing in mind this audience is primarily folks that have been part of this climate change summit. So a lot of folks affiliated with Loyola, but not exclusively, people from across the US that may or may not live near a steel mill or live near a wastewater treatment plant. So could you tell us a little bit about what alliances are helpful and respectful and what that looks like for you?
But, one of the most important things is that I have learned through the work of my mother that we really try not to govern people by race, because we only perpetrating what other folks think. Judge people based on their expertise and their willingness to come in the community to help, not to lead them, but to help. And that's two distinctive difference. So I think that because it's about our life, air is not discriminatory. We breathe the same air. We drink, utilize the same water. We just live on different land that is complex, because I don't think the greatest intention was to pollute the area in the 1800s, for an example. It was just the way that we managed stuff. And now it's coming back to bite us. And that's what research and science is so greatly needed, because we wouldn't get to the level where we are today if we didn't understand what had happened to it and was damaged to us in the past. That's the reality. But when it comes to community like mine who have been ignored, disrespected, and abused, we have to put abuse in there, and exploited, it's difficult to gain trust. So you have to develop trust. Is not automatically you coming and saying you're gonna be Superman for our neighborhood. That's not a realistic expectation. Are you ready to grind with us? Are you ready to get down with us to help us to develop a plan? For an example, we just saved the C building, one of the very first school buildings that was ever built in Algiers. I went to that school from pre-K to first grade. And I have a personal investment, and like many other folks, but it was the very first school that was ever built. CPS didn't have a plan, so they decided they wanted to tear it down. We got together and we worked with other allies in the community to help us to get the message out to say we want to save this school building. We ran up saving this school building, but there's been a discussion about this school building for many years that we haven't associated with with your university, because he's an alumni, and one of the things that we trying to look at, how can we turn this historical building around? And we're saying we want to make it the Hazel Johnson Institute for Sustainability and Environmental Justice, and that's what we need the expertise right now today, because there's a lot of environmental hazards that need to be remediated. There's a lot of trades that can be offered to be able to fix up the building. But the most important is transferring that property to the community, because the school didn't have no use for it. They was going to tear it down and build a playground. That's not when the need is so great in our community. So helping us, I use this as an example. I got Courtney Hanson. She's from the North Side, and she came from she was a graduate student doing her work at the University of Chicago. And she asked, can she intern with us? She interned with us. She wound up coming back. I asked her to do some contractual work. And now she's the deputy director of PCR. And this is one of the first white employees we ever had with PCR. And she loves us and we love her. We are family in the community. So we try not to look at race, but we're realistic about race plays a major role in a lot of decisions. We're not saying that we're ignorant to that fact. We're not letting that be a judge for our way of working with the general public. That's the way my mother has always been, is willing to work with anyone that's willing to work with our communities, but you have to come through, you got to come serious to help us to make a change, because the work is needed. And that's what we lack, that resources and those expertise, because one of the things our organization is 100% supported of is the red line extension from the Chicago Transit Authority to 130th Street. And that's the street that was named after my mother, the Hazel Johnson EJ Way. Wouldn't it be awesome to see that this transit be developed where a kid in my community or a person in my community could catch one train to come all the way to Loyola University on a one-way ticket? Yeah, I always advocated it for that. That it would just be awesome. And the exchange where students can get access on one transit to come to help us in our community. Because one of the things my mother always believed in, that the Hazel Johnson Institute for Sustainability and Environmental Justice can bring academic, government, community, and the business community to come together to solve some of the environmental problems we have in the Southeast side of Chicago. This is a learning institute, and his name is Mike, who's alumni from your university. He made a connection to where I really never really thought about it, but all our school is named after George Washington Carver, an environmental scientist, So connecting that, to teach our kids about water quality, to teach them about remediation, to teach them about climate justice, to teach them about economic opportunity, to teach, to come back and restore the community through the education that we once had in this community back in the 60s and 70s and 80s.
So, I mean, what I hear you saying is the importance of doing work in relationship, not doing for, but doing with.
Right.
And showing up and being ready to grind.
Right.
For me, I also think, especially in the Chicago context, that, for example, I think about the controversy around deciding where General Iron should go. So I think also there's an analysis that needs to happen, that as communities work to push out contaminating facilities, they have to have an awareness of the possibility that those same facilities could land in a neighborhood that is less politically connected. And so then the push from more politically connected and affluent neighborhoods needs to be rather than arguing not in my backyard, arguing not in anybody's backyard, and making sure there's proper mitigations as well as economic development opportunities. Something you were saying came up from one of our audience members. So Michael Kohler said that Cheryl has a bigger vision for Altgeb Gardens as a landmark institution for sustainability and environmental justice. Can you briefly describe that vision as a center to teach sustainable communities and environmental justice?
Well, that's just like I've just mentioned earlier. It should serve as a vehicle to bring all levels of people, institutions, community, and local business in the area to come together to build what we say to revitalize the area, to make it more green, to make it more sustainable in our area. But the most important thing is that to promote STEM opportunity during the process from kids from third grade all the way, and track them all the way through high school, for an example, because that's where the disconnect happened, is to get our kids to get the public to understand the relationship between public health and our environment. And how can we make it sustainable now from the past damages that we had created, but not intentionally. Well, some would say, I got to keep it honest, some is intentionally. That's why our community has been bombarded. But outside that principle, that how can we turn this around to be a learning opportunity for the future that comes? Because if we don't, then we're gonna see more devastation than what we are currently experiencing now. So why not start in the area that has been mostly negative impacted and redevelop that area to become one of those sustainable areas that did a 360. I mean, not 180 degrees, not a 360, because we do a 360, we back where we started, but to do 180 degree change in our community, that would just be awesome, because the opportunity exists now, because it's happening in our area. But, as you mentioned with the General Iron, that was just a classic example of environmental racism in the city of Chicago, taking it from the north side, the most affluent area in the city of Chicago, and bringing it down to the most poorest area. And not so much, and because of relocation of it, but we pay attention to the behavior of the industry that relocated. What their background looked like, what their history did. It was never to protect the public. It was only to just make money.
Make a buck, yeah.
And that's not, I mean, I know we're a capitalist society and we're here to make money, but at the expense of costing the government to supplement the health damage that is created because of the operation, because you failed to follow what guides you to do right in your operation.
Right. And
that's what we challenge, because we talk about worker safety too, because they are the ones that immediately going to be impacted also from those negative activities that happens in these industrial facilities.
Right. And I think what happens in a lot of neighborhoods that are considered sacrifice zones is it's not just about concentrating the negative impacts, but also who benefits. So a lot of the folks that work in these facilities don't live in the neighborhood. So ultimately the host community ends up taking on all these negative impacts without the benefit. And so I think part of it is not just about mitigating the harm, but also making sure that some of the benefits come to the host community in ways that are meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
Cheryl, what are some of the campaigns or issues that are most pressing to you in people for community recovery today?
Okay, one of the most, the three things pressing things that we are working on is first that Congressman Bobby Rush had introduced 3 legislation to honor the work of my mom, but it's bigger than what my mom, and we're at PCR is trying to push forward the fact that a congressional medal that go into the African American Historical Museum in DC will create a space and a home for discussion about EJ, because it's currently not there, in regards to people around the country who are doing amazing environmental justice work in their communities, in their neighborhood. It gives us a home in that museum. Secondly, the making the month of April the Hazel Johnson Environmental Justice Month is to really bring out an awareness to the general public about doing good in your neighborhood, trying to revitalize your community, understanding that these environmental harms do exist in community, and let's start the conversation on how we can clean it up. For an example, let's take a whole, it took centuries to contaminate our community. So this one little small month to start people to thinking about careers in the environmental fields. We need environmental scientists, we need sociologists, we need folks that focus on it, because it's not just about industrial pollution, but it's the intersectionality of housing quality, education, as we said earlier, all the different factors that determine if I'm going to live in a healthy, viable community or not. So, and also, I would have to say this is my only personal belief. Who don't want their mother on a postage stamp? I would love to be able to go to the postage office and buy stamps on my mother. That's just, I believe that's the commemorative part for, acknowledging the work that she have done on the serious side. But that's my personal thing. I would love to see that opportunity. But we also engage on the state level. Our second campaign is really trying to get the community far as energy burdens, and to be involved with solar energy, for an example, as a way to help people. And because we got the Climate and Equity Job Act passed, signed by the governor last year, it opened up a lot of opportunities for Black and brown low-income communities to reduce their energy burden or to improve their energy efficiency. Because we're talking about, one of the biggest thing about accepting solar panels, for an example, on a house, that in my community, if you're talking in my community, the house is not in good standards to be able to accept that. So where's resources available to help people to bring their house up to capacity to be able to accept solar? There's funding for that. There's funding for training. There's funding for contractors who can partner with a solar industry to bring solar opportunity to the community. So we really, because my mother always advocated, there always have to be an alternative to the practice that we use in the past. What is those new practices? So solar, because fossil fuel, that's dirty coal industry. We don't need nuclear, that's contaminating soil. So let's look at something that was started in the beginning that we just stopped using, wind and sun and water to produce our energy as we used to in the beginning of things. So just trying to be engaged in those conversations that is happening in our area, and to make sure that we have a level of understanding to say that we want to support it. And we do want to support it. We want to support solar in our community. We want to support wind to produce energy because of the burden. But here we go back to the trust has been torn up by the utility company. Because in my communities, people are used to only seeing, getting an estimate of what my bill meant, not the actual cost of what I'm contributing, what my utility cost is. And only thing I see them is when they shutting it off or reconnecting my services. Water, no one should be not having water to come in their house because their inability to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
That's just inhumane.
Mm-hmm.
So making sure that the city had good policies that address water quality issues in our area.
Mm-hmm.
So, and just looking at, right now we involved with the vaccination, to make sure that our community had the opportunity to be vaccinated in the community. So we've been out advocating and sponsoring events with the community to get them more engaged. So those are the four or five campaigns that we are definitely involved with in our community that we need to have, more improvements in. But we always stress ourselves like that because these are values that we think that are important to our organization.
Well, and I think something you're pointing out is environmental issues aren't in a silo, they're connected. And so especially it's important to have a racial justice analysis in terms of who's at the table making these decisions, who benefits from them, who's burdened by them. But also, I mean, I like how you're bringing in issues about recognition, especially when it comes to your mother and people who've been doing this work a long time. The state and corporations having transparency in terms of what it is that they're selling you, what it is that you're paying for, talking about economics. Again, with solar power, like, yes, being aware of the importance of climate change, and again, having an analysis of like who's going to produce the type of infrastructure we need, who's going to get those jobs. Is solar power even, or solar energy even, a relevant resource for a place like Olive Gardens? And I also especially think it's important that you mentioned water is a human right. Safe and affordable water is a human right. Can you tell us about your vision for the future of environmental justice work? So again, coming back to the title of the talk, it was about environmental justice on the southwest side, or excuse me, the south side of Chicago. And can you tell us about just what you see as the future, what you imagine, what you vision moving forward?
Well, I vision that there would be a major cleanup in this area in regards to some of the contamination that exists. I just hopeful that the cleanup will happen from the community that's most impacted by it. Also, looking at making the Southside at least a new era of doing business that is safe and sound, environmentally sound for each community. I mean, that's a big vision, but in the smaller scheme of things is getting the ability to continue to have the ability to work with different neighborhoods. Because even though we work a whole lot with the Southeast Side Environmental Task Force that represents the far east side of Chicago, and we're here on the south side of Chicago, and we may have different issues, but the issue is still the same. You know what I mean? So the ability for us to grow as neighbors, to build, to challenge some of the systemic environmental conditions in our community, and to try to get those improved. That's the only thing that we can say, and to empower the people to have the right to challenge the system, because it's the system that got us like we are today. That's why we're engaged with city ordinances development, for an example, making sure our voices are heard in all spectrum of the city of Chicago, but also paying attention is making sure that the state does what it's supposed to do when it comes to the protecting public health and the environment. Because it's a shame that the state of Illinois never denied a permit to an industry in our community, and this is the first time ever the city of Chicago denied a final permit to any industry in our community. We need to see, hopefully we can inspire more people, or even a curriculum to be developed to have more inspectors that goes out and do environmental inspection, that sometimes are independent from what government, so that we can get a true assessment of what these industries is doing in our community, but also to have community builders to help community restore their neighborhoods. I mean, that's what we're trying to set an example in our community, trying to restore our community. And that's why we look for the preservation, as Michael just said earlier, in regards to being listed any day now. I mean, the decision is being made on the federal level for us to be one of the national historical places.
So I know we're wrapping up. A number of questions have come in about specific policies. I want to ask one from Nancy Tuckman, who is also the founding dean of the School of Environmental Sustainability. So Dean Tuckman asked, how do you see CEJA, the Clean Energy Jobs Act, how do you see it being implemented in underrepresented racial minority communities in Chicago?
It's most importantly, we've been involved with the implementation of that policy. You know, that's important to make sure that our voice is at these table as far as the distribution of the opportunity that are coming out of the CEJA bill, for an example. Making sure that there's an allocation and there's a process for the allocation to help contractors become contractors, for an example, through the opportunity that comes under CEJA. Making sure that that information is getting down to our community as far as the outreach and getting people to be engaged with the training or the contracting opportunity that exists with that, or the service that they can get, and making sure that there's resources to help people to meet to get where they wanted to be in that whole CEJA opportunity that is under this bill. It's hard because changing the mindset about utility burdens and opportunity is hard in my community when there's been so much abuse by the people who are managing it, which is ComEd, for an example, with electricity, for an example. So, you know, that's a hurdle that we're striving to try to see how we can overcome that, to help people believe that these services do happen. But the only challenge is that we got the political processes that are hindering the opportunity for it to move in a faster pace, because $30 million was not spent in FEJA for these opportunities for my community. So I don't want to, you know, we hope not to see that happen under the CEJA bill, for an example. So it has a lot of challenges, but the most important to make sure that what wasn't in FEJA is now happening. And FEJA was the Future Energy Job Act that will provide these opportunities, but didn't have no supported services to go with it. Now under CEJA, it has the supported services and the resources to make sure that it happens. But the challenge is getting people to believe when there's a huge mistrust of the utility industry.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then we had a few people ask questions about the health impacts, which we've talked about somewhat. So Colin Hart and also Ron Cox especially asked questions on this topic. Ron Cox wrote, could you please describe how your mother's actions created a community-wide awareness and movement to have a safer environment? Were there difficulties in creating community action? And what activities did she use to engage the larger community? And how did she handle a lack of engagement? I just want to, again, say how sensitive I think it must be talking to people, especially if they've lost a child, and explaining, well, that could have been because of this particular chemical emitted by this particular company. That must be extremely difficult to talk about health impacts when people have lost loved ones or experienced sickness. And so, you know, if you could talk a little bit about how one does that sort of thing in a sensitive way, and in a way, I mean, I can imagine if someone said that to me, I would feel angry and sad and disgusted. And so how do you shift that righteous anger into action? Yeah, if you have any insight about that.
Well, one of the things that our organization under my mother leadership was able to do was to make that direct connection to the smells that comes off the sewer plant, for an example, versus the smell that came off a landfill when they're releasing methane gas when it's decomposing, and the smell of the sludge beds from the water treatment facility, where it's everything that come out of our sewer line and our sinks and tubs. She was able to make that connection to some of the respiratory problems that people had, because we was able to document people teaching people how to see how their kids' asthma, for an example, was impacted by the air quality on that particular day. What was they doing? Where was they located? What time this was? What type of weather pattern that it was, for an example, that people would keep a daily chart on. And then it's just the fact that it was just challenging in our neighborhood to get people to really see that these has a direct correlation with some of the health problems that you have. Because as I stated earlier, cancer was not something that people was willing to talk about, because it was labeled as a curse, for a family. And the fact that you mentioned earlier that we thought that respiratory problems like asthma was hereditary. These are the things that we are just taught in our community, by our health providers, for an example, in our community, because we didn't have no one to triage our community for our environmental related health issues. It's just that when we just can survey the community and there are 500 people in your community say they got asthma, that's uncommon. You know what I mean? So just have to measure medical stuff anecdotally, because no government agency wanted to ever do has not done an epidemiological study in our area to be able to come up with some of the definitive health statistics that we know that exist in our community. So it's just that now, we're involved with the community impact. What's community impact from chemicals and processes in our neighborhood, and the land use practice is a way that we're looking at to be able to reduce some of the environmental health harm that we are experiencing in our community by challenging no process. But there's no cut and dry way to say that the community engagement of it is that, because we, Chicago was so resistant to environmental issues in our community, let's know the health impacts that we are, many community has been crying for in their community. The city is not prepared for that. The city is trying to get prepared today to be able to look at those measurements, because there wasn't no process in the city of Chicago to get a level of understanding. So, and it was a resistance. We got to think about the resistance from the political structures and powers that negatively impacted our community as a result of what they allowed to happen in our community, and trying to give a voice. So it's almost like we was caught in the middle of situation. We do, we don't, we do, we don't. And we just follow what we believed in, what we thought was right. And that's what my mother always said. Follow what your gut feelings tell you. You may not be the expert of it, but you know when something is wrong, because it don't feel good. And you know what is right and what you're doing. And that tends to open the doors for other opportunities. So it was hard. It was hard to get our community convinced to know that this does have an impact on your health and your quality of life. On the same token, we got to fight the system that created this, because they telling us that this doesn't exist. When they know it exists, we just got to prove to them that it existed. So it's complicated. and it's still complicated, but you're hearing a lot of discussion about it in the last 10 or 15 years, making those connections. 20
Yeah,
years.
and I think we're gonna wrap up, but I think, I mean, to me, some main takeaways is this work is so important. It has real impacts on people and has historically for a long time. It's not just, it's not inevitable. And it's really hard, both because people are struggling, having to deal with their own issues of survival, and if the people you're trying to hold accountable include Chicago or the EPA, groups whose job is to protect your health, and there's resistance involved in that, that's tough work. And so, you know, I don't want to sugarcoat this. I just want to say that we commend you, we respect you, we thank you for giving this time. It's valuable time. There was a comment in the chat about making a donation. So I saw David shared the website for People for Community Recovery. I think that's a great idea. And then, you know, I hope people are fired up both from this talk as well as the conference overall. Anything else, Cheryl, that you hoped I would ask you that as we're winding down, you want to make sure we touch on?
No, I just want to say, just thank you for giving me the opportunity to have this discussion, because just like you said earlier, it is so important, and it's about us, and it's our choice. Either we're going to live in a better environment, or we're going to continue living in a poor environment. And I take the latter. Just join us. Just join me. You know, this work is critical for our future generation. We have to protect them.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna continue the thanks and just start with thanking Nancy Tuckman and the rest of the gang over at the School for Environmental Sustainability, and all the other people at Loyola who've made this week possible, for including us here at Curl. Thank you all. Thank my colleagues here at Curl, who I can see on the screen here. They're behind the scenes, Meredith Farrar, Yasmin Kerr, and Teresa Newman, for all their work. Thank you all for attending. We had a great turnout, very much appreciated it. And then, of course, most of all, thank you to Amy and to Cheryl for this conversation and for the work that you do, and for the work that all the people listening in are doing to make our world a better place. So thanks. This has been a fascinating conversation to listen in on, and inspiring to roll up our sleeves and continue the important work. So thank you. And
All right,
thank you all for attending.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good day, everybody.
All right. Bye-bye.